Hey guys, tonight we are doing laundry, Viking style. The sun isn't even up yet, but you're already ankle deep in cold mud. Your hands are raw, your nose stings, and somewhere to your left, someone is cheerfully wringing out a woolen tunic that smells like regret, swamp water, and what you sincerely hope is fermented sheep sweat. You probably won't survive this. No offense. Viking Laundry Day isn't the romantic historical detour you think it is. It's a test of endurance involving smoke, lye, urine, and wool so heavy it could double as a punishment. And that's before you get to the frostbitten rinse cycle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I mean it. If medieval soap chemistry and communal pit washing sound like your thing, welcome. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the slushy spring soil outside the longhouse with a pile of stiff, grimy tunics under your arm. The air bites, clean in that biting, nasal-clearing Scandinavian way, and you're wearing last week's underlayer because your other one is the pile you're about to wash. There's a cold smear of dread settling behind your ears. Laundry day, and it's not a quick spin and dry. It's a saga. First, location. Your washing station isn't a warm, tiled utility room with a lavender-scented detergent pod waiting in the wings. It's a low, soot-darkened lean-to at the edge of the homestead, nestled near a half-thawed stream. There's a wooden tub already half full of lye water, a second one still smoking from its last boil, and two enormous stones resting at the ready for beating cloth into submission. You look down at your own arms. You're going to need more muscle, or more time, or both. One mainstream historical fact? Vikings were surprisingly hygiene conscious, for their time. Archaeological finds across Scandinavia and beyond show a range of grooming tools: combs, tweezers, ear spoons, and soapstone vessels. They bathed when they could. They combed their hair often. And yes, they laundered their clothing. But Viking laundry wasn't a daily or even weekly ritual. It was a chore done in chunks, when the weather, the water, and the wool all cooperated. Which was rare. And when the time came, it was serious. A full tunic could weigh several kilograms when dry, double that when wet. Wool doesn't just soak up water. It hoards it, and Viking clothing wasn't minimal. A working outfit might involve multiple layers, from coarse undergarments to a heavy overdress, apron, belt, hose, and sometimes fur. It all had to be cleaned, or, let's say, retolerated, eventually. The garments you're dealing with are stiff. Not from starch, but from life, sweat, smoke, milk, soot, and the oddly crusty blend of sea spray and sheep oil. The first step is to soak them, so you haul the bundle to the lye tub. Ah, yes, the lye tub. Viking soap didn't come in bars. It came in buckets, and it wasn't made of coconut oil and rose petals. It was made of wood ash and stale urine, stirred until it formed a primitive alkali solution strong enough to strip grease from wool and probably etch your soul a little. Lye is not gentle, it's efficient, like a vengeful librarian. Quirky historical tidbit? Viking households often collected urine in ceramic pots, yes, full-time pee jars, then let it age. The resulting ammonium-rich liquid, called lant, was used not only for laundry, but for cleaning metal, tanning hides, and sometimes even as a dye fixer. It was an all-purpose cleaner with very few friends. You pick up a wooden paddle and stir the tub. The steam that rises is not the comforting steam of a hot bath. It is challenging. It smells of burned trees and forgotten corners of the barn. You dip in a tunic. It resists. You push. It accepts. Slowly, grudgingly, like a teenager asked to apologize. You let the garment soak, moving on to the next, layering fabric into the lye bath like bedding a stew. You're not scrubbing yet. That comes next. For now, it's about saturation. Getting every thread wet enough to be beaten into submission. You glance around at your fellow launderers. A woman nearby uses her elbow to press down a bundle of hose. A younger girl pulls a smock from the second tub and drapes it over a rack, steam curling from the cloth like a ghost escaping. No one is talking, no one is smiling. This is not a social event. This is work. Historians still argue whether Viking laundry was communal or solitary. Some suggest it was an individual, household task, each family managing their own. Others point to settlement layouts, shared riverbanks, and communal tub spaces as signs that laundry was sometimes done in groups. Likely, it varied by season, status, and how desperate everyone was to not wear the same shirt again next week. You turn back to the tub and begin stirring the cloth again. The tunics twist and tangle, like kelp in a storm tide. Your hands are numb, your arms ache, and you've only just started. The wool fights you, not dramatically, just persistently. Viking garments weren't built to fall apart. They were built to outlive you. Eventually, you'll need to rinse these, to beat them against stones, to drag them into the stream and chase them when the current decides it wants your socks more than you do. But that's later. For now, you stir, and soak, and breathe through your mouth. Somewhere, a raven croaks from a rooftop. You glance up at the sky. It's just past dawn, only 12 more hours of this to go. You smile faintly, not because it's funny, but because your fingers are too cold to frown. You don't even remember when your sleeves got wet. Probably sometime between the third tunic and that regrettable moment when you tried to squeeze a wool apron through a gap in the barrel that was clearly not wide enough. Now the water has wicked up your arms, your fingers are pale and swollen, and your elbows smell suspiciously like pine smoke and vinegar. It's fine. This is fine. This is Viking laundry, and if the garments don't scream, apparently you aren't doing it right. You kneel beside the second tub now, the hotter one, the one that never quite stops steaming. This is the boiling vat, and it exists to terrify filth into leaving the fabric. Unlike the lye soak, which gently corrodes things over time, this step is an exercise in violent persuasion. Clothes go in raw, heavy, and guilty. They come out visibly humbled. Mostly, not always. One mainstream historical fact? Vikings did, in fact, boil their clothing, at least sometimes. Particularly tough stains, heavy work garments, or anything infested with lice or mites could be thrown into a kettle and simmered for hours. It wasn't ideal for delicate fabrics, which were few, but for coarse wool and linen? A good boil could loosen dirt, kill pests, and refresh a tunic in the way that steam cleansing a medieval tent might refresh a bear. You don't ease the garment into the water. You shove it, carefully. This is no gentle soup. You stir with a wooden pole, the kind that doubles as a curtain rod or a means of fending off cranky goats. The cloth bubbles and tumbles under the surface, twisting like a sulky eel. The smell is potent, a sort of scorched wool aroma layered over the earthy tang of lye and the faintest hint of whatever that shirt last encountered. Was it cheese? Was it something worse? You don't ask. Quirky inclusion? Some families added herbs or bark to the boiling water, not for scent, but for function. Birch bark added a faint astringency. Juniper was antibacterial. A few bold households tossed in bog myrtle, which supposedly repelled lice and neighbors. There's also an account, half forgotten, half suspect, of one woman who added powdered charcoal to bless the cloth with night, though no one's quite sure whether she was aiming for purification or just trying to make stains harder to spot. You fish a tunic out with the pole and lay it on a nearby bench, steam curling from its seams like a dragon exhaling through its sleeves. The fabric now feels half-cooked, softer, but swollen, heavier. Your fingers sink into it like bread dough. Not clean yet, but surrendered. Historians still argue whether boiling was routine or rare. Some think it was reserved for illness, an emergency cleanse for plague or infection. Others argue it was standard for soldiers' gear, or in colder regions where rivers were inaccessible for half the year. Either way, it wasn't done lightly. Wood was precious, fire took hours, and the smell tended to linger for days. You kneel at the edge of the vat and press another bundle down. The water sloshes. Your face warms for the first time since dawn. You almost, understand the appeal. Not of the work, but of the process. There's a strange comfort to it. Repetition, heat, the certainty that something will emerge changed. Of course, not every garment survived the boiling. Threads could warp, colors could fade, embroidery sometimes ran like frightened chickens. But that, too, was part of the equation. Nothing came out of Viking laundry the same. Least of all you. You think of the shirt you wore last summer, the one that stuck to your back during that miserable trek to the mountain pasture. The one that now lies in the bottom of the vat, slowly wringing itself of salt and memory. It's just a tunic, but it carries the shape of that day. And now, it's letting go. The fire beneath the vat spits. Sparks drift up like tiny messengers. You stir, and for a while, it's almost meditative. The hiss of water, the rhythm of breath, the slow turning of cloth through heat and time. Until, of course, the youngest child from the longhouse wanders too close and nearly topples face first into the tub. You lunge, save them, scold gently. They giggle and sprint off, leaving you damp and slightly scalded. You sigh, return to the stirring. It's a cycle. Soak, boil, beat, dry, wear, repeat, and you're not even halfway through the pile. But still, you'd rather boil 100 tunics than wear any of them again unwashed. Because now that you know what laundry really means, what it takes, you can't unknow it. Every clean shirt? A miracle. Every halfway dry sock? A triumph. You press the paddle into the steaming vat. The fabric sinks willingly. There is dignity in this. Not glamour, not grace, but the kind of slow, scorched dignity that smells faintly of soap ash and sheep. You exhale, wipe your forehead with the back of your hand. Realize too late it's soaked and lie. Wonderful. Laundry day continues. The first thing you notice is that your knuckles have gone entirely white. Not from fear, but from the merciless friction of scrubbing a wool tunic against a rock that looks like it's seen both the Ice Age and 6 generations of angry washerwomen. The second thing you notice is that the rock is winning. You've moved from the boiling vat to the rinse and beat station, which is just a generous term for a large flat stone beside a muddy stream and a shared bucket of hope. Your shoulders ache, your spine feels like a weather vane in a thunderstorm, but the garment you've wrestled into shape, heavy, wet, and still steaming faintly, is ready for the next round. Welcome to the stage of Viking laundry where cleanliness is achieved through sheer force of will. One mainstream historical fact? Vikings scrubbed their clothing by laying them out on rocks and beating them with paddles or pounding stones. These weren't smooth pebbles or polished marble slabs. They were coarse, uneven, and specifically chosen for their rough surfaces. Friction removed the dirt, repetition removed the soul. If boiling loosened the grime, this step evicted it. You slap the tunic onto the stone with an unceremonious squelch. It lands like a sack of seaweed. A woman beside you hands you a pounding paddle carved from driftwood. You grip it tightly, lift, and strike. The sound is cathartic. A dull, wet thud that echoes across the streambed and into the tree line. You hit again, and again. It's not violence, not quite. It's rhythmic, purposeful, laundry as percussion. Quirky inclusion? There was no single, correct, tool for this process. Some used wooden bats. Others favored flat stones. A few bold launderers used bundles of sticks, tied together and swung like a flail. There are whispered tales, half joke, half truth, of one woman who used a goat skull, claiming the spirit of the goat added bite to her laundry technique. No one questioned her. Her tunics were terrifyingly clean. You scrub now, dragging the wool down the face of the stone. The friction catches. The water sprays. Your knuckles bark against the grain. But the tunic, finally, faintly, changes. The dirt lifts. The color peeks through again. Faded ochre. Stubborn green. You rinse in the stream. The water goes dark, then clear. You exhale. It's not clean by modern standards. There's still discoloration in the seams, and a suspiciously persistent patch on the hem. But it smells less offensive. More like wet forest than wet livestock. You'll take it. Historians still argue whether these aggressive techniques were universal or region-specific. Some regions may have had smoother river rocks, Others used hollowed logs or portable washing boards. There's even speculation that certain laundry rocks were sacred, passed down, blessed, or cursed depending on the local folklore and family tradition. You look around now and see a circle of laundry warriors, each hunched over their respective stones, arms rising and falling like wings. It's almost beautiful, like a strange, sudsy dance. There's no music, just the slap of wool, the gurgle of the stream, and the occasional grunt of someone trying to detangle a hose from itself. And then comes the twist. No, really, it's time to twist the water out of the clothing. If you thought the rock beating was exhausting, wait until you try to wring a Viking tunic. It's not fabric, it's a sodden fleece with a grudge. You grab both ends of the tunic and twist in opposite directions. The fabric groans, water leaks, your arms scream. After a few turns, you switch directions and do it again. Eventually, maybe, most of the water gives up and drips back into the stream. The cloth now weighs slightly less than a horse. Progress. You drape it over a nearby log to dry. Not that it will. The sky is heavy with clouds. The air is cold, but you live in hope. You move on to the next garment. This one's worse. Coarser weave, dried fish scales clinging to the collar. You roll your eyes and slap it onto the stone. The rock chuckles silently. It knows who's in charge. And through it all, you start to lose track of time. The pounding, the dragging, the twisting, they become natural. Your breath slows. Your hands move before you think. This isn't laundry anymore. It's a rhythm, a ritual, a full-body meditation with wool and water. You pause once to shake out your arms. A young boy nearby is rinsing a pair of mittens with a stone the size of his head. His expression is blank, focused. You nod in solidarity. He doesn't see you. He's inside the laundry trance. This is Viking laundry. Brutal, inefficient, satisfying. And when you finally look down at your hands, raw, red, puckered with water, you realize something incredible. You're almost halfway done. Only 12 more tunics to go. You chuckle quietly. The rock does not laugh with you. The garments are no longer soaked, they're simply soggy with purpose. Every tunic, apron, and hose leg hanging over the drying lines now resembles a drippy flag of surrender. Some lie draped across logs. Others hang from low tree branches, shoulders drooping like exhausted oxen. You wipe your brow with a reasonably clean sleeve, which is more symbolic than helpful at this point. But now comes the real test. Will they dry before the goats eat them? You step back to admire your slow-motion wool forest. The steam has stopped rising. The lice sting has faded from your hands. And yet you know, deep in your soul and your aching back, that Viking laundry isn't finished when the clothes are clean. No, it's only finished when they're dry. Which might be tomorrow, or next week, or never. One mainstream historical fact? Drying was just as crucial, and difficult, as washing in the Viking Age. Without sunlight, warmth, or reliable airflow, wet wool could stay damp for days. Left too long, it grew sour, mildewed, began to host entire ecosystems of scent and texture. In warmer months, drying lines were strung between fence posts or tree limbs. In winter, clothing might be brought indoors, hung near the fire, and rotated obsessively to avoid scorching. Sometimes it froze first, then thawed, then dried, technically, but in springtime, with the fjord mist hanging just overhead and the breeze still flirting with frost, you pray for a miracle, or at least enough sun to dry your socks. Quirky inclusion? According to one fragment of a 12th century Icelandic domestic verse, a shirt hung long breeds rain and ravens. Scholars think this was either a warning to take your laundry in quickly, or just a poetic way of saying don't forget your underwear in the garden. There are also folk tales of forest spirits taking a liking to drying garments and stealing them if you weren't careful. If your best tunic vanished overnight, it wasn't your neighbor. It was probably an elf. Or the wind, or both. You eye your drying line, suspiciously taut and sagging with freshly cleaned tunics. A breeze stirs. One sleeve lifts like it's waving at something in the woods. You move to reinforce the corners. Drying a Viking garment isn't a passive affair. Wet wool stretches, hems warp, sleeves go limp. Some weavers used small stone weights tied to the bottom of garments to keep them straight while drying. You do the same, tying stones into corners like desperate little anchors of dignity. One falls off immediately and sinks into the mud. Typical. And the smell, oh, the smell, changes as the fabric dries. No longer just lye and smoke. Now there's something else, something faintly herbal, faintly swampy, faintly woolen in a way that clings to your dreams. You inhale. It's not good, but it's honest. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of Viking drying methods. Some believe most clothes were only partially dried before being worn again. Others argue that indoor drying racks were common, especially in wealthier homes. What's clear is that drying was not a one-step affair. Clothes were rotated, flipped, wrung again, and occasionally even reboiled if mildew set in. Nothing like discovering that your clean shirt now smells like it was murdered in the woods. You glance over at the apron you hung first. It's lighter now, still damp, but beginning to feel like cloth again. You flip it, you talk to it, quietly. Dry, please. The apron does not answer. But you think it heard. A chicken wanders dangerously close to the laundry rack. You glare at it, it pecks aimlessly. The last thing you need is bird prints on your only unslimy hose. You toss a small pebble toward it, gently, diplomatically. It waddles off in a huff. Victory. The sun peeks out between clouds, briefly. You turn your face to it like a sunflower. If you could, you'd hang your own soul out to dry. This is the part no one talks about in heroic epics. Not the forging of weapons. Not the building of ships. But this. The standing and waiting, hoping the air is kind enough to finish what you started. Somewhere behind you, someone sneezes into a sleeve that was supposed to be drying. You do not turn around. Some things are better not known. You return to the tunics, give them each a hopeful tug. The worst is over. Probably. Laundry is not glorious. It is not swift. It is not written into the sagas. But you know now why it mattered. Why a clean cloak was a sign of pride. Why dry linen was a luxury. Why a shirt without a smell was almost a social achievement. Not because of laziness, but because of this. The waiting. The hoping. The goats. You'd like to think the worst is over. That the pounding and twisting and dragging of half-frozen wool through incooperative water has earned you some kind of reprieve. But then, you are handed a clay jug. And before you even smell what's inside, you know. This is the part of Viking laundry that separates the dreamers from the survivors. You're about to handle the soaps of doom. And no, this isn't the nice kind that smells like pine forests and ambition. This is ash. This is fermented urine. This is the past, and it's angry. One mainstream historical fact? Viking soap wasn't soap as we know it. No tidy bars, no lavender essence, no creamy lather. It was usually lye, made from water filtered through wood ash, or more horrifyingly, a blend of ammonia-rich stale urine and water, left to ferment for days or weeks. The result was a caustic solution strong enough to cut through grease, fat, and your wool to continue. You pop the cork from the jug. The smell hits instantly. It is sharp, acrid, oddly sweet in the wrongest way. Your eyes water. A nearby sheep makes an offended noise and walks away. You don't blame it. This stuff works, though. It cleans. It breaks down the grime that boiling can't touch. You pour a small amount into a wooden bowl and dip a rag into it. Your hands twitch. You press the rag to a tunic's collar. Rub. Rub again. The smell intensifies, as if the cloth itself is remembering everything that's ever happened to it. Which is, frankly, too much. Quirky inclusion? In some Norse households, urine collection was scheduled, with certain pots designated by day or use. Monday's jar might be more potent than Thursday's tailings, depending on diet, temperature, and ferment time. There are references, though half-joking, to urine so strong it could clean a chainmail hauberk. Whether true or not, the phrase, "he's got Tuesday's jar," became a mild insult in at least one preserved saga fragment. You soldier on, dabbing the solution into stubborn stains. A smudge on a sleeve, a smear near the hem. The ammonia sings up your nostrils like a horn blast. You switch rags, dab again, gag. The smell doesn't fade, it multiplies, as if celebrating its escape from the jar. And yet, weirdly, it works. The stain loosens. The weave brightens slightly. You rinse the area with cold water. Steam rises faintly. The garment looks, well, less like it was found in a bog. This is progress. Historians still debate the full spectrum of Viking cleaning agents. Some regions may have used plant-based soapwort or birch ash blends. Others leaned heavily into ammonia chemistry, particularly in places where wood was scarce but people were plentiful. What's agreed upon is that these solutions worked, and were often reused. A batch of lye could last multiple laundry sessions, growing stronger and smellier over time. You shift to another garment, a linen smock with a mysterious gray patch on the shoulder. You don't ask what caused it. You just dip, dab, and scrub. The rag foams slightly. Your fingers tingle. You hope that's a sign of effectiveness, not impending nerve damage. Nearby, a woman is wringing out a dress with her sleeves rolled to the elbow. Her hands are red from scrubbing. Her face is blank, focused. There's pride in her posture, though, a kind of quiet authority earned from years of making the unspeakably filthy wearable again. You get it now. Laundry isn't just a chore. It's a battle, between cloth and earth, between oil and water, between your nose and everything it ever believed in. You finish with the smock. Hang it on the line beside the others. It drips slowly, a single drop catching the sun before falling to the dirt. One more tunic conquered. The jug sits heavy in your hand. You glance inside, still half full, still terrifying, still essential. You sigh, move to the next garment. If Viking laundry has taught you anything, it's this. Cleanliness isn't about sparkle. It's about effort, about standing in a mud-soaked yard with frostbitten hands and deciding, once again, that this is worth it. That you will fight the stains. That you will wield the jug of ancient ammonia like a potion master. That you will, not glamorously, not gracefully, but determinedly, keep going. You dip the rag again. And somewhere, under layers of wool and effort, you feel the threads start to forgive you. The water has turned to slush. Your hands are stiff, your breath shows in long silver ribbons, and the tunic you just finished rinsing is already freezing into a misshapen sculpture of Viking misery. Congratulations. You're doing winter laundry. You are now officially part of the elite few who have discovered what happens when damp wool meets Arctic air. Spoiler. It becomes armor. Very cold, very inflexible armor. You shift your weight from foot to foot, trying to keep the feeling in your toes. The bucket beside you is crusted with ice along the rim. You'd thought it was steam when you hauled it out. It was frost, and now the stream, your lifeline, your rinse station, your co-conspirator, gurgles low and mean between jagged banks, threatening to freeze solid by nightfall. You dunk a pair of hose into the water. They come out stiffer than they went in. Of course they do. One mainstream historical fact? Vikings didn't stop washing clothes in winter. They just suffered through it. The Norse world didn't allow much downtime. Cold didn't excuse the work. If your only tunic was turning green, you washed it, even if your fingers froze to the washstone in the process. Bathing might slow down, grooming might shift indoors, but laundry still happened, often near streams kept thawed by fire pits, hot stones, or sheer stubbornness. You breathe on your hands, then immediately regret it as your wet sleeves wick the heat away faster than a gossip in a mead hall. You reach for a fresh shirt, frozen stiff like it's in shock, and attempt to beat it back to flexibility. You slap it against the stone. It cracks, not figuratively. A thread literally snaps. You blink, consider crying. The tears might freeze. Quirky inclusion? There's a Finnish and Norse crossover tale of a woman who hung out her linens during a snowstorm, only to have the gods pity her. When she returned, the garments were not only dry, but warm. They called her blessed. More likely, she had an unusually efficient chimney. Still, She was reportedly exempt from laundry for the rest of the winter, a miracle coveted by washer folk everywhere. You lay out the cracked shirt to dry again, this time in the half-sun between two rocks that may or may not be radiating warmth. You turn to your soaking mittens. No point boiling them now. The firewood is low, the cauldron cold, so you wring them out, badly, and slap them on a stick near the hearth. They'll be dry by spring. Historians still argue whether Vikings had special, winter methods for drying clothes. Some believe clothing was hung near the ceilings of longhouses, rotated over days like jerky. Others argue that lightly soiled clothes were simply frozen clean, scraped with knives and shaken out like rugs. Desperate times, desperate measures. You try the freeze clean method on a child's tunic. It's mostly stiff. You shake it out. A small cloud of frost and dust explodes into the air. It lands on your lashes. You stare at the tunic. It now smells like wind. Good enough. There's something almost mythic about this part. Laundry in the dead of winter. It feels closer to ritual than routine. Every step hurts. Every breath counts. You're not just scrubbing garments, you're surviving with them. When the shirt makes it through the thaw, it becomes legend. You don't just wear it, you honor it, and yet, people did this. Over and over. They didn't romanticize it, they didn't tweet it, they just did it, because you needed your one tunic to last through 30 more freezes. Because no one wants to sleep in trousers that smell like pickled fish. You move slowly now, each item washed and wrung as if it's the last one on earth. Your muscles ache from wringing frozen cloth. The pile never shrinks. The cold creeps higher up your sleeves. But you've come this far. You've beaten the stains. You've boiled the wool. You've wielded the lie and lived to sniff about it. This is just one more layer. One more sock to snap back into shape with your bare, cracking hands. You look up. The sky is clear. A raven wheels overhead. It does not help. And so you keep going. Because Viking laundry doesn't stop when it gets hard. It stops when the laundry stops fighting back. You're not alone anymore. The sun has risen a little higher, though not much warmer, and now, the laundry site hums with movement. Women, children, elders with wiry hands and sly humor in their eyes. Everyone has a role. Everyone has stains to banish. Welcome to the community wash circle, where the washing is slow, the gossip is faster, and your technique is definitely being judged. The stream has become a stage. Rinsing lines stretch like spider webs between fence posts. Garments hang like defeated flags. Someone's tunic drips rhythmically onto a sleeping chicken. You notice no one moves the chicken. It knows its place in the pecking order, and that place is beneath a damp apron. One mainstream historical fact: while much Viking washing was done at the household level, archaeological and literary evidence suggests that communal laundry happened regularly, especially in larger settlements and during warmer seasons. Shared riverbanks became hubs for cleaning and conversation, a blend of domestic ritual and social checkpoint. If the feast hall was where you heard news, the washing circle was where you learned what people really thought. You find your space on a worn stone slab, just wide enough for elbows. Beside you, a woman is scrubbing a child's tunic with grim precision, muttering something about goat tracks and berry stains. To your other side, two younger girls compare their wool-wringing strength by how far they can fling water droplets. You duck. Too late. Quirky inclusion? In some regions of Scandinavia, it was customary for washers to bring tokens or charms to hang from the line, small carved bones, teeth, or beads thought to ward off bad luck or laundry disasters. Losing a garment to the wind wasn't just annoying, it was bad omen. Some charms were carved with runes for hold fast or do not fall, strung onto drying lines like ancient laundry insurance. You notice one now, a tiny carved seal tooth hanging by a red thread from the line. It bobs gently, confident. You make a mental note to find one for yourself. Maybe a rock, maybe a button, maybe a potato. The gods are flexible. Historians still argue about how structured these communal gatherings were. Were they scheduled? Did people claim laundry days for certain households? Or was it a chaotic, first-come first-wrangle system? Likely, it varied by region and season. But what's clear is this: the community wash wasn't just about soap. It was about connection, observation, calibration. You start to hear snippets around you. Someone's son has broken a sled runner. Someone else's goat ate the storage roof again. A new bride in the next fjord allegedly tried to dye her linens with blueberries and turned her groom's cloak purple. That one earns a collective sigh and a few approving nods. Bold choice. You quietly switch to your next tunic, one that smells less like clothing and more like an unfortunate experiment in fish fermentation. You don't comment, neither does the older man nearby, who's scrubbing his own hose with the calm of a monk. But you both know, some clothes carry secrets. Children dart through the lines now, playing tag between flapping sleeves and dripping hems. One accidentally crashes into your leg and grins with 4 teeth. You hand her a slightly cleaner sock. She frowns, throws it, balance is restored. You lean into your rhythm again. Scrub, rinse, beat, wring. The sun glances off the stream, turning it briefly to silver. A wind picks up. You reach instinctively for your garment, and just in time. The tunic lifts, flutters, tries to fly. You grab it by the hem like a falconer catching a rogue hawk. The circle laughs gently. This is the magic of it. The chaos, the shared exhaustion, the way everyone keeps one eye on their own pile and one on the clouds, because Viking laundry day can turn from serene to stormy with just one bad gust and an overconfident drying pole. You adjust your grip, tie the tunic more securely. The charm on the neighbor's line winks at you in the sun. And suddenly, you feel capable. You belong here, in this absurd orchestra of suds and shouting. You understand now why they do it together. It's not just practical, it's protective. Shared labor lightens the load. Shared laughter lengthens the day. And shared judgment keeps your technique sharp. You grin. Someone hands you a bartered cake of ash soap and says, "Try this." It bites harder. You nod, and try not to take it personally. You'd hope that, eventually, someone would come around with a small woven sign that said, "Good enough," and let you go home. But no such mercy appears. Instead, you stand in front of your modest line of washed garments, each one stiffening in the breeze like a row of suspicious elders. They do not sparkle. They do not shine, but they are, technically speaking, clean. At least, clean by Viking standards. Which is to say, they're not crunchy anymore. Mostly. One mainstream historical fact? In the Viking world, cleanliness was a relative concept. With limited access to soap, inconsistent heat, and fabric that often doubled as raincoat, blanket, and picnic cloth, garments rarely reached what we'd call modern hygiene. The goal wasn't sterile perfection. It was something far more attainable, not actively offensive. You poke at a tunic. It no longer smells like eel stew. Progress. The linen shirt next to it is still faintly beige instead of white, but it no longer folds in half by itself. The hose? Let's not talk about the hose. You'll probably burn them in a week. Quirky inclusion? Some Viking households kept a special guest shirt. A single, slightly cleaner tunic set aside in case someone important arrived unannounced. It might only be worn once or twice a year, but it served as a form of textile hospitality. Worn during feasts, funerals, or to show off during trade negotiations, the guest shirt was rarely washed. It was stored in herbs, aired weekly, and protected like treasure. The rest of the family just tried to look less stained by comparison. You consider whether anything on your line is guest-worthy. You decide no. But it's not about that. Today wasn't for impressing, it was for survival. You beat the lie. You braved the frost. You negotiated a truce with a wool cloak that had clearly become self-aware. Historians still argue over how often clothing was cleaned. Some sources suggest Viking garments were washed every few weeks. Others claim it could be seasonal, particularly in winter when rivers froze or fuel was scarce. Either way, a truly clean set of clothing was an event. A victory, sometimes a public one. You remember now, oddly, vividly, how earlier in the day, A woman had walked through the wash circle with a still wet smock held high like a banner. No holes, no streaks, no lichen. The nods of approval she received were slow and sincere. That was Viking pageantry. Behold, my smock glistens. You reach for your own smock now. It's lighter, not fresh, exactly, but neutral. It smells like effort, like boiling, like wind, and that, in this place, is the scent of success. You begin taking garments down, one by one, folding them as best you can. The wool refuses to cooperate. The linen sags, but your pile grows, warm and uneven. You don't smile, not quite, but your shoulders do lower. And then you notice something. A patch of blue on the collar of your tunic. Not mold, not dye, sky. The sun has crept through the clouds for just a moment, casting soft light across the drying yard. The garments catch it like sails. The lines flutter. You stop folding. Just watch. This, too, is part of laundry day. Not the boiling, not the scrubbing, but the quiet that comes after. The part where the tunics hang still, not frozen, not steaming. Just done. It's easy to forget how many layers a single day holds. How many aches you can collect in your fingers. How many smells you can identify without trying. But at the end, when the garments hang quiet, when the soap buckets are tipped out and the pounding rocks lie unused, you start to feel the weight lift. You didn't get everything clean. No one ever does. But they're clean enough. And in the Viking world, that was a badge of honor. You shoulder your pile, and the wind, mischievous as ever, tugs a single sleeve from your bundle. You catch it before it falls in the mud. Because you, seasoned laundry warrior, are done being nice. The sun has dipped lower now, tracing a long amber line along the tops of the fences and casting tall shadows from the drying racks. You're down to the last few pieces, oddball garments, bits of hose, a half-felted cap that smells vaguely like spoiled milk and moss. These aren't your finest items. In fact, some of them seem to be actively rejecting the concept of cleanliness. And then there it is, folded over the edge of the farthest bench, the shirt. Not a shirt, the shirt. The one that's been worn to the field, to the hearth, through rainstorms, during woodcutting, and quite possibly as a substitute for a rag when the pot of turnip stew exploded last spring. This shirt could walk away on its own. And it nearly did. It's stiff, grimy, gray with ambition, and as you lift it, it creaks like a reluctant barn door. You brace yourself. This is going to be a long rinse. One mainstream historical fact: Viking garments, especially working clothes, were made to last, but they absorbed everything. Sweat, smoke, grease, salt, animal dander, and the soot from cooking fires. Without synthetic materials or modern stain removers, many of these garments reached a level of embedded filth that today would qualify as an archaeological find. Cleaning them wasn't about restoring them to perfection, it was about breaking the surface enough that they could be worn without drawing flies or causing social alarm. A shirt that could stand up on its own was, quite literally, normal in this world. You slap the shirt onto the wash stone with a grim sort of reverence, as if challenging it to a duel. It lands with a heavy thud and holds its shape for several seconds, still folded like a fossil. The other washers glance over, nod in recognition. Everyone has one of these in their pile, a shirt that transcends filth and becomes an entity. You pick up the scrubbing brush, still damp from earlier, and start working at the collar. It doesn't respond. You scrub harder. The dirt gives, slowly, like an ancient oath being broken. You flip the shirt, attack the hem. There's something crusted into one sleeve, perhaps pitch, perhaps jam, possibly both. You don't ask questions, you just scrub. Quirky inclusion? In some Norse settlements, there were jokes about living shirts, garments so thoroughly marinated in life and labor that they were believed to have souls. These items were never burned or discarded lightly. Some were even passed down through generations, softened by decades of wear and mystery. There's an Icelandic tale about a tunic that outlived its owner and was eventually used as a sailcloth patch because it already knew the wind. You're not sure if your shirt is quite there yet, but it does seem to resist folding and smells faintly like thunder. Historians still argue whether such heavily used garments were ever truly cleaned, or whether they simply reached a stage of acceptable dirt equilibrium. Some believe particularly crusty items were layered beneath cleaner cloaks to hide their offenses. Others think a well-scrubbed, working shirt was more prized than any piece of jewelry. Either way, the shirt in front of you is now yielding, thread by thread. The fabric has softened slightly under your repeated rinses. The color, once an indeterminate mix of grime and disapproval, now hints at its original tone, muddy cream? Maybe, you'll never know for sure. You wring it out, twice, then 3 times, and finally, with arms aching, drape it over the drying line. It flops like a resigned fish. You pat it gently. You've earned this moment. So has it. You step back. The rest of your garments hang quiet now, steaming faintly in the slanting light. There's a calm that settles over the space, not from completion exactly, but from effort spent. Every washer here looks a little wilted, a little bent, a little victorious. Some hands are stained, some fingers are wrapped, all backs are sore, but every line is full. Every shirt, smock, sock, and hose has fought and fallen, rinsed and risen. And among them, yours do not stand out. Which is the best compliment you can hope for. Because Viking laundry wasn't about perfection. It was about respectability, about being clean enough to share a bench, to stand beside someone at the hearth, to lift your arm without an ominous scent escaping. In a world where clothing was precious and bathing unpredictable, a day of washing wasn't routine. It was a full campaign. And your army of garments, though weary, now stands tall and, at least for now, no longer capable of walking off by themselves. The clothesline sags under the weight of damp wool and linen, fluttering softly in the breeze like a half-hearted battle flag. You've taken a seat now, not because the work is finished, but because your legs have stopped pretending otherwise. The bench beneath you is damp, everything is damp, and still, you sit there, chin tucked in your palm, watching your garments sway. This isn't the proud reveal of a job completed with flourish. It's a quiet kind of triumph. The kind of slow, aching satisfaction that only comes after wrangling a day's worth of dirt, stink, steam, and splinters into submission. You breathe deep, expecting the sour ammonia of soap and smoke, but what greets you is different. It's the scent of wet cloth, and wood smoke, and possibly chicken feathers. Welcome to Laundry Day as public theater, where the stage is your own yard and every neighbor is in the audience. One mainstream historical fact? In Viking settlements, especially tight-knit villages and farms tucked into fjords or spread along trading coasts, laundry was visible. It had to be. There was no secret basement washer or private balcony clothesline. Garments were washed in public, dried in shared spaces, and judged, however quietly, by anyone walking past. What you hung out to dry didn't just reflect your skill with soap and stone. It reflected your reputation. A spotless apron might say, "I am attentive." A consistently crusty pair of hose? That said, "Please don't seat me near the stew pot." You glance to your left. The neighbor's line is impeccable. Whites. Well, off-whites, draped in descending size order. Tunics smooth, not a sleeve sagging. Even their charm token is neatly centered. A small carved bird made of bone. You look at your line. It's functional. Some garments overlap. One sleeve twists around a pole like it's afraid of falling. Your charm is a knotted piece of bark. You tied it with hope and poor coordination. Still, the garments are clean. They're upright. That's something. Quirky inclusion? There were documented instances of Norse traders being evaluated on their laundry. If a visitor arrived wearing a tunic that looked water-warped or lye-burned, it might suggest poor resources, or worse, poor discipline. It's why some wealthier merchants hired others to wash their linens before big voyages, even if that meant borrowing someone else's laundry space. To appear spotless was to appear capable, especially in negotiations. Clean cuffs, clean coin, as one proverb goes. You watch as a few children run between the drying lines, playing some kind of improvised chase. One ducks beneath a sleeve, disappears behind a curtain of cloaks, reemerges wearing someone's half-dried hood as a helmet. No one stops them. In fact, this chaos is half the charm. Laundry day wasn't a quiet event. It was more like a minor festival. No drums, but plenty of drama. You glance across the yard as someone discreetly inspects a neighbor's hanging garments, giving a tunic the universal up and down. A raised eyebrow, a tiny smirk. The tunic in question is technically wearable, but its left sleeve has shrunk by a hand's width. The gossip will be subtle, slow burning, delivered perhaps through bread trade or over flax combing tomorrow morning. Historians still debate how closely Viking households tracked each other's cleanliness. There's little written evidence of laundry-based shame, but plenty of indirect clues. Sagas note appearances, especially in court scenes or at feasts. Clean clothes meant you'd made an effort. Dirty ones, particularly if visibly dirty, meant laziness or misfortune. And in a culture where honor was measured in how you presented yourself, your drying line may as well have been a resume. You take a moment to repin a hose that's threatening to jump. Your fingers, swollen from cold and labor, fumble with the twine. You knot it too tightly. It doesn't matter. The hose will dry, eventually. And it'll go on to do its job. Protect your legs from briars, sea spray, and uninvited goat sniffs. If someone judges the seam or the uneven warp, so be it. You lean back again, letting your gaze sweep across the yard. You see lines stretched across gardens, lines hung between low stone walls, lines that catch the sun just right and make the whole world feel like it's breathing out steam. It's beautiful, in a stubborn kind of way. A village drying its laundry is a village showing its underlayers, its mess, its care, its effort, its humanity. And there's something intimate about it. Something honest. No one here has 20 tunics. No one has matching hose sets. The shirt you washed this morning might have once belonged to someone else. Might have doubled as a blanket, a sail patch, a swaddling cloth. Each piece tells a story. You don't need embroidery for that. You just need wear, wash, and wind. A woman passes by and nods at your line. Not a full smile, just a nod. You nod back. That's the review. You never thought a drying rack could feel like a battlefield, but here you are, clutching a clothesline like it's a lifeline as the wind picks up with all the mischief of a god who's bored and looking for sport. The garments flap with enthusiasm bordering on mutiny, tunics whipping sideways, sleeves coiling around posts, hose twisting like they're trying to escape back into the wild. This is no longer drying. This is survival. And then, just when you think the scene has reached peak absurdity, a chicken wanders into view and casually begins pecking at your half-dried linen. You lock eyes. It does not blink. One mainstream historical fact? Viking laundry drying often took place in open-air yards, shared clearings, or sloped meadows adjacent to longhouses. There were no clips, no fancy line tensioners, no retractable reels. Just poles, ropes, branches, stones for weights, and hope. Garments were laid out on hedges, fence rails, or flat-topped rocks. Drying wasn't an hour-long errand. It was a day-long gamble, and anything from weather to wildlife could compromise the outcome. You move quickly now, grabbing one end of the line to retie a tunic that's slowly corkscrewing itself into a rope. You anchor it tighter around the pole and reach for a wool cloak nearby, only to discover that it's been dragged halfway into the dirt by a pair of goats who are now chewing the edge with grim determination. You mutter something unrepeatable under your breath and shoosh them away with your broom. They retreat, offended but not defeated. One of them deliberately steps on a drying sock as it leaves. Quirky inclusion? In some parts of Scandinavia, families devised creative methods to deter animals from interfering with laundry. Strings of jingling shells, bundles of pungent herbs, or dangling scraps of oxidized iron were hung near drying racks. These deterrents were meant to repel not just goats and chickens but also the Huldre folk, the hidden people. According to folklore, the Fae were known to steal clean garments to disguise themselves among humans. A cloak gone missing wasn't always blamed on a neighbor. Sometimes it was blamed on a creature of the woods with very fine taste in tunics. Historians still argue over how often garments were lost or damaged during drying. Some scholars suggest that missing clothing was such a common problem that many families stitched personal runes into the hems of their garments, essentially the Norse version of a laundry name tag. Others believe most people simply knew whose clothes were whose, either by weave pattern or smell. It's a comforting thought, if slightly tragic, that your identity in the Viking Age might come down to how distinct your shirt's odor was. You retrieve the trampled sock. It's damp again, slightly greener. You rinse it in the stream without ceremony and hang it again, this time higher, out of goat range. The wind rattles the line, but this time you're ready. You've reinforced the stakes, tied better knots, and even added a flat stone to the bottom hem of the cloak. The cloak swings like a pendulum but stays upright. You feel a flash of pride. Until the chicken returns. It's still pecking at the linen. Not maliciously, just curious. You wave a hand. It waddles 3 steps, then resumes. You nudge it gently with your boot. It hops onto a bench and begins preening itself atop your best drying smock. You sigh. That smock is going to smell like poultry. Possibly forever. You sit again, slightly damp and now feather adjacent, and watch the sky. The clouds have begun to thin, revealing streaks of pale blue. The sun cuts low shadows across the drying garments, turning each one into a waving banner, flags of the everyday. Not warriors' cloaks or ceremonial robes. Just shirts and skirts and hose, each one stitched by hand, worn threadbare, washed, and now waiting to dry. There's something deeply human about this. Something small and beautiful in its repetition. These pieces of cloth have touched every part of life, birth, meals, sleep, sorrow. And now they hang together in the wind, not noble or grand, but necessary. And in their wild flapping, you see a kind of defiance. A little shirt caught on a crooked peg refuses to fall. A scarf weighted with a spoon manages to twist itself into an elegant shape. Even the goat-nibbled cloak has settled into a graceful swing. You lean back. The wind is still brisk, but now it feels like part of the rhythm. You've learned to work with it. The drying rack has become a strange little orchestra of motion, cloth flapping, poles creaking, ropes humming with tension. The breeze carries the scent of wood smoke, wet wool, and the faint tang of ash soap. Somewhere behind you, someone hums a tune you don't recognize. Maybe a lullaby, maybe just a melody for the day. You close your eyes, not because you're finished, but because, for now, the clothes are still upright, the chickens are manageable, and the wind, finally, is on your side. You don't want to touch it. Not really. The soggy heap of wool folded at the edge of the bench isn't just another item of clothing. It's a challenge to your dignity. A dare whispered across centuries. You lift the corner gingerly and confirm your worst suspicion. You're holding Viking underwear. Not some dainty linen shift or easily laundered breechcloth, but a full-bodied, overworn, and quite possibly undefeated pair of woolen undergarments. The color? Once white, maybe. Now, a shade best described as historical gray. The texture? Like trying to wash a sheep that has developed opinions. You roll up your sleeves. Here we go. One mainstream historical fact? Vikings absolutely wore underlayers, often linen or soft wool, depending on the season and status. Men typically wore loincloths or fitted woolen briefs under tunics, while women had shifts, chemises, or lightweight smocks beneath their overdresses. And these garments, being closest to the body and absorbing the brunt of daily labor, required the most frequent washing. Unfortunately, they were also the least talked about. Underwear didn't make it into the sagas. It made it into the wash bucket, again and again. You lower the woolen item into the rinse basin. It doesn't sink so much as it resists drowning. You push. It floats back up like a smug sponge. You add more water. It begins to soak, slowly, like it's forgiving you for touching it. You reach for the brush. This will take all your strength and none of your pride. Quirky inclusion? Despite the general silence around underclothes in Norse texts, a handful of accounts, including burial finds and rare textile scraps, suggest that some Viking undergarments were patched repeatedly, sometimes with fabric taken from worn-out tunics. It wasn't unusual to find a pair of woolen briefs lined with linen, or vice versa, stitched so thoroughly that no original thread remained visible. One Danish find includes what appears to be a woman's shift with over 10 separate patches, suggesting it may have outlasted multiple owners. There's a kind of heroism in that. You begin to scrub. The waistband is worst. It's stiff from sweat, friction, and perhaps the lingering memory of saddle travel. The wool gives, reluctantly, under the brush. The rinse water darkens like steeped tea. The scent is not entirely unfamiliar, earthy, sour, and alarmingly human. You keep going. This is the only pair. This is someone's everyday armor. Historians still debate the exact fabrics used for Viking underwear. While linen was common and preferred for its softness and breathability, wool was warmer and more durable, especially in colder months. The problem? Washing wool underlayers was both essential and risky. Too much agitation, and they shrank into child-sized tortures. Too little, and they retained more memories than the person wearing them. You flip the garment and scrub again. There's a thin seam running across the back, hand-stitched, but rough. It was mended with thick thread, possibly in a hurry. You can imagine someone in the early light, muttering curses while trying to re-sew the only underlayer they owned with a dull needle and frozen fingers. You finish the scrubbing and move to wring it out. The wool clings to itself like a creature. You twist. Water pours. You twist again. The wool creaks audibly. You know it's not truly clean. Not by modern standards, but it's better. Less haunted. Ready to serve again. You drape it over the line at the very back, behind a row of more respectable tunics. You pat it, not unkindly. It flops into place like a tired dog. You take a step back and, for a moment, regard it with something like admiration. It's ugly, it's scratchy, but it's here, still going. So are you. Someone nearby is washing what might be a similarly intimate item. Less wool, more rag. You exchange brief, wordless nods. No one's judging. Not today. Everyone's pile contains at least one thing they'd rather not explain. And still, everything dries in the same wind. A child runs by, pointing at your drying line, giggling at the odd shapes of sleeves and hems. You shrug. If that's the most scandalous thing they see today, they're doing fine. You return to the bench, hands numb again, heart a little lighter. You just did something nobody wants to talk about, but that everyone needs done. You washed the thing that hides beneath all others. And you did it with quiet bravery. Your hands look like they've lived through 3 lifetimes. Wrinkled, raw, and tinged with the reddish gray of lye, soot, and stubborn wool dye, they feel twice their size and half their function. You flex your fingers, slowly, each joint complaining like a tired mule. As you shift on the bench to prepare the next round of garments, you hear a high, exasperated sigh behind you. A child, not more than 7, slumps against a wash tub, both arms inside a damp linen smock, attempting the world's slowest scrubbing. Welcome to child labor, Viking edition, where small hands handle small clothes and small tempers fray quicker than yarn in a storm. One mainstream historical fact? Viking children didn't enjoy a leisurely childhood. From as young as 5 or 6, they were expected to contribute to the daily work of the household, including laundry. Tasks scaled with age and strength. Smaller children hauled water or scrubbed middens, while older ones twisted hose, stirred vats, and eventually learned the nuances of wool fiber stubbornness. Work was identity, and laundry, though tedious, was a deeply instructive part of Norse domestic life. The child behind you resumes scrubbing. Slap, drag, sigh. You turn to watch. She's using a flat piece of bark as a scrubber and attacking the linen with the same energy one might use to wrestle a loaf of wet bread. It's admirable, and pitiful, and familiar. You remember learning this. How to feel the cloth under your knuckles. How to pace your strokes so you didn't exhaust yourself in 5 minutes. You shuffle closer, gently swap her bark for a smoother stone, and demonstrate a better rhythm. She watches, tries, nods. The linen flattens into submission. Quirky inclusion? There are oral traditions, particularly from rural Icelandic families, of children being punished not with chores, but by being assigned particularly smelly garments to wash. A father's fishing cloak, for example, or a mother's fermented cheese apron. These tasks were meted out not cruelly, but as a kind of right. To earn your way back to favor, or to prove your mettle, you tackled the laundry equivalent of a troll. One saga fragment describes a boy who washed the ailed tunic without crying, and was rewarded with the larger piece of roasted seal at dinner. You glance around and see that this child isn't alone. Another, maybe 9 or 10, is filling buckets from the stream, trudging back with water sloshing over the rim and soaking his boots. A third is hanging a set of mittens using pegs and some highly inventive knots that will definitely be a problem later. They're working, not efficiently, not gracefully, but earnestly. This is how they learn, not from instruction, but from repetition. From scraped knuckles, from soap in the eye. Historians still argue whether these roles were taught formally or absorbed through observation. Likely both. A child standing beside their mother or grandmother would see the process dozens of times before being handed their own scrubbing rock. And laundry, unlike spinning or cooking, was loud, wet, and everywhere. You couldn't ignore it, you lived in it. You offer the girl a chunk of soap, brown, homemade, still slightly squishy. She grins. It smells like ash and juniper. She resumes scrubbing with slightly more pride now, the smock beginning to foam where she presses. Her hands are red already, her sleeves soaked. She'll earn her supper tonight. You turn back to your own pile and begin working again. It's easier now. The cloth seems more willing. Your muscles remember the shape of the movement. Your eyes dart toward the fire pit where more water is warming, steam curling lazily in the late afternoon air. Everything is moving, softly, slowly, toward clean. There's no grand applause, no reward at the end of each garment. Just the quiet satisfaction of a job done better than before. And for the children, that's the beginning of everything, of responsibility, of skill, of confidence. In time, that girl with the bark and the foam will be tying her own line, teaching another pair of small hands how not to tear a sleeve with too much pressure. You smile faintly, even as the wind chills your damp cuffs again. It's a legacy of scrubbing. And it's written in every pair of aching hands. You never imagined you'd spend an entire afternoon in hand-to-hand combat with a pair of woolen trousers. But here you are, bracing the waistband against your thigh while rhythmically thudding the fabric with what is essentially a wooden club. The sound is dull and solid, like a drum that's given up. You're not trying to beat dirt out at this point. That happened hours ago. No, now you're simply trying to make the trousers soft enough to wear without declaring war on your thighs. This is the forgotten stage of Viking laundry. The part where you attempt to convince wool that it doesn't need to feel like punishment. One mainstream historical fact: Viking wool garments, especially those worn close to the body, were tough, coarse, and often full of lanolin, the natural grease found in sheep's wool. While this made clothing water-resistant and durable, it also made it stiff, scratchy, and unyielding, especially after washing. Beating freshly cleaned fabric was an accepted, even necessary, method of softening it, usually with paddles, mallets, smooth stones, or just your own fists if the day had already taken everything else from you. You give the trousers another solid whack. They flop over, sulking. You slap them again. There's no science here, no delicate adjustment of threads. It's catharsis in the form of textile manipulation. You pound out creases, stiffness, and the last of your upper arm strength. Each strike sends a puff of moisture into the air. By the 6th swing, your shoulder burns. By the 12th, your irritation turns into determination. This garment will bend. Quirky inclusion? Some weavers developed a specific rhythm for this process. 3 beats on the thigh, 1 on the bench, then flip. It wasn't just efficient, it was almost musical. There's even a legend from the Faroe Islands about a woman who softened her husband's cloak so well that he refused to take it off, wore it to bed, and declared it his new heirloom. It was buried with him. The cloak, reportedly, looked softer than he did. You look around. Others are at it too. A man 2 benches down is stomping on a wet cape laid over a flat stone, knees pumping like he's churning butter with his shins. A teenage girl is rolling a tunic between two sticks, pressing and unrolling, trying to work the fibers loose. Everyone is in their own world of rhythmic persuasion. Historians still argue whether Viking textiles were intentionally rough or simply became that way through use. Some claim the lanolin was preserved to protect against moisture and cold. Others believe it was an unwanted byproduct that couldn't be fully removed with early soap methods. What's certain is that comfort wasn't assumed, it had to be earned. You pick up a linen underdress next, hoping for mercy. It's lighter, less rebellious, but still holds its shape like it's preparing to go on stage. You fold it neatly, press it between your palms, then begin the beat, steady, even, deliberate. The fibers loosen just enough to breathe. You can almost hear the shift in tone as the fabric gives up its stiffness. You sigh in relief. Not everything needs to fight. Nearby, the child from earlier is mimicking your motions with a sock. Her version of beating is more like enthusiastic patting, but the intent is clear. She glances at you for approval. You nod. She beams. Her sock is still soaking, still sad, but now it's part of the ritual. And that's how it starts. You think back to your first time doing this, how your arms shook, how you thought surely the cloth would break before it ever softened. But no, wool is resilient, so is skin, and after a while, it's not about brute strength. It's about consistency, timing, knowing when to push and when to pause. The trousers are softer now. Not luxurious, but wearable. You fold them with the care given to something that has been through a battle and come out changed. You stack them neatly with the rest, then move to the final piece, a long woolen scarf, damp and limp. It barely needs beating, just a few presses along the seam, a roll between your hands. It hums with warmth, like it remembers the neck it kept safe all winter. You sit back for a moment, rolling your shoulders. The air smells faintly of wood, wool, and steam. Your hands are sore, your forearms stained, your legs numb from sitting. But the pile of softened clothing beside you feels like a monument. A tribute to endurance. You stand, stretch. Feel the ache ripple down your back. It's not pain, it's proof. And as you carry the last garment to the line, you realize, you've turned scratch into softness. And that, in this life, is a kind of magic. There's a moment, as you finish pinning the last damp cloak to the line, when the wind shifts, just a little, and carries with it the unmistakable scent of your labor. Not the sharp ammonia of lye. Not the damp wool of a cloak that fought back. No, this is something else entirely. The after smell. The lingering trace of what's been lifted, stirred, aired, or barely masked. Viking laundry, it turns out, doesn't end in cleanliness so much as it ends in olfactory negotiation. You inhale slowly, and yes, there it is. That delicate bouquet of soap ash, wet sheep, smoked leather, river mud, and human effort. It's a smell you'd recognize in your sleep, though you'd probably rather not. One mainstream historical fact? The Viking Age was defined not just by how people looked, but by how they smelled. Personal scent mattered, deeply. In a world where everyone lived in tight quarters, worked closely, and shared common spaces for everything from cooking to sleeping, how you smelled was inseparable from who you were. The Norse placed high value on grooming, bathing when possible, and yes, cleaning clothes. But with the limits of pre-industrial hygiene and long intervals between fresh water or soap, Viking odor culture wasn't about deodorizing, it was about managing perception. And manage it they did. Scents were layered, not erased. If your tunic still smelled a little like smoked fish after 3 rinses, fine. Just add birch bark, rosemary, or moss to the drying process and call it a day. Underlayers might be packed with mint or bog myrtle to ward off both insects and suspicion. Cloaks could be hung in the smokehouse for a day or two to reset their scent. It was less about elimination and more about curation. Quirky inclusion? There's one surviving Norse charm that was stitched into the hem of a woolen belt. It contained a linen pouch filled with dried meadowsweet and carved with runes reading roughly as, "Let the wind bring favor." Historians debate whether it was a love charm or simply a very poetic air freshener. Either way, it shows that even in a world of salted herring and stale ale breath, Vikings made an effort not to reek unnecessarily. You walk past your line now, and each garment has its own story of scent. That apron you boiled twice still holds the ghost of cabbages. The hose have surrendered their mildew smell in exchange for a faint whisper of wood smoke. The underdress smells surprisingly neutral, successfully washed of embarrassment. Even the infamous undergarments are now quietly existing, no longer radiating danger. That's victory. Historians still argue about whether olfactory customs were local or widespread. Some sources point to elite Norse households using imported oils and resins, suggesting an ancient form of perfuming. Others believe scent management was entirely practical: dry herbs, smoke exposure, and personal habits. What's agreed upon is that scent was social. If you smelled strange, people noticed. If you smelled strange consistently, they started asking questions. You return to the bench with a bundle of drying grass, pressing it gently into the seams of a damp tunic. This is your version of finishing salt, a final touch. The grass has a clean, grassy sweetness that softens the musty undertone. You roll the tunic, slowly, letting the fibers absorb the scent. You do the same for a scarf, and then for the scarf's owner's second-best shirt, the one that always smells a bit like goat no matter what. You can't win every battle, but you can layer a little mint along the collar and hope it buys you mercy. You smile. It's not perfection, it's not floral, but it's earned, and this is what Viking Laundry Day smells like in the end: effort, honesty, and the faintest trace of green things, hiding the truth just enough to let you walk into the feast hall without clearing a bench. You sit back on the bench, eyes half closed, breathing it all in: the smoke, the lie, the herbs, the cloth, the salt. A scent of the everyday, held in wool and hope. You are now staring at two tunics that are technically the same garment, but only one of them seems to have taken the concept of cleanliness seriously. The other, while marginally lighter in tone than it was 6 hours ago, still radiates an energy that says, "I've seen things." The reason? Fabric politics. Viking clothing wasn't all made equal, and nowhere is this more obvious than when you're trying to launder linen and wool side by side. What began as a unified laundry pile has now become a masterclass in frustration, because cleaning different fibers with the same tools is a bit like trying to grill fish and bake bread in the same oven at the same time. It's possible, but something is going to come out weird. One mainstream historical fact: Viking Age garments were most commonly made of two materials, wool and linen. Wool came from the hardy sheep that thrived in Scandinavia's harsh climate, resilient animals that produced a greasy, coarse fleece. Linen, meanwhile, was spun from flax, a plant that required more delicate handling and a significantly more involved process from stalk to thread. Wool was warm, durable, and excellent at repelling water. Linen was lighter, more breathable, and prized for underlayers and summer wear. Both had their virtues. Both had their laundry nightmares. You hold the woolen tunic in your hands. It's already half dry, a bit stiff from earlier beating but otherwise docile. Then you pick up the linen smock. It's wetter, thinner, and has developed a series of tiny folds that refuse to smooth out. One collar corner curls upward like it's trying to make a point. You soak it again, give it a gentle scrub, and realize the fibers feel fragile, like they're just barely holding hands. Wool forgives. Linen remembers. Quirky inclusion? Linen was often considered a luxury item in parts of rural Scandinavia due to the intensive labor involved in processing flax. Some wealthier Viking households imported fine linen or dedicated special plots of land solely to flax cultivation. There's at least one tale, admittedly exaggerated, of a bride who brought her own linen smocks to a new household as a form of dowry, along with a stern warning: do not let his sisters wash these. You shift your attention to the linen shirt's cuffs. The dirt clings to the seam like gossip. You dab the edges with a slightly diluted mixture of ash lye and warm water, rubbing gently. It's working, but slowly. The fabric's color lightens, but the weave warps a bit under pressure. You rinse and smooth it by hand, whispering apologies. You'll need to stretch it over a curved board to dry properly, or it will wrinkle like an old apple by morning. Historians still debate how often linen garments were laundered compared to wool. Some argue that linen, being lighter and more susceptible to staining, was washed more frequently, despite its fragility. Others suggest that because of its expense and delicacy, linen was aired, spot cleaned, and preserved more cautiously than workaday wool. It's likely that people did what made the most sense based on their priorities. Some stains got scrubbed, others got ignored, and some garments got worn until the weather changed and then washed. You sit back and compare the two garments side by side. The wool is heavier, darker, water-repellent. The linen is light, crinkled, and slightly transparent when held to the sun. One is stubborn, the other is sensitive, and both are necessary. You drape them over different parts of the drying line. The wool goes up easily. It's already half dry and holds its shape. The linen needs a little more coaxing, careful clothespins, a little weight at the bottom hem to stop it from twisting into a scroll. You step back, both flutter in the same breeze, but in very different ways. And that's the strange poetry of Viking laundry. Two fabrics, one life. The wool protects you in the field, on the sea, in the cold. The linen cradles your skin, breathes for you, sleeps with you. They're washed together, worn together, and woven into the same day. But they require completely different handling. Understanding that, knowing which cloth needs beating and which needs smoothing, isn't just domestic skill. It's wisdom. You stretch your arms, look down at your pile. Still a few more shirts to go. A woolen hood, a linen head wrap, a small stack of garments that seem to have defied classification altogether, some unholy blend of plant fiber, mystery thread, and salt crust. But at least now, you know what you're up against. And you know which ones will break before they bend. By now your forearms are stained in permanent blotches of lye and river mud, and your back has adopted the slow, bent sway of someone twice their age. Yet you're oddly energized, not clean, not rested, but alive in that particular way that only comes after facing something thoroughly unpleasant and somehow not being defeated by it. Which makes it the perfect time for a little light existentialism, courtesy of an age-old question: were Vikings actually clean? The real answer is as slippery as wet wool in a windstorm. One mainstream historical fact: the image of the Viking as a filthy, unkempt brute comes more from their enemies' propaganda than archaeological truth. Anglo-Saxon chroniclers, particularly in the 9th and 10th centuries, mocked Viking hygiene, saying they bathed too often, brushed their hair too much, and seduced local women with their suspiciously clean appearances. In fact, Norse grooming habits were unusually detailed for the time. Combs made from bone or antler have been found all across Viking age sites, from York to Birka to Hedeby, along with tweezers, ear spoons, nail cleaners, and even razors. Some burials included grooming kits, suggesting personal appearance mattered even in the afterlife. Still, there's a big leap between groomed and clean, and this is where things get interesting. You glance over your latest half-dried tunic, a thick woolen overlayer that's clinging to the clothesline like it regrets everything. You wrung it twice. You beat it, you rinsed it until your arms trembled, and it still smells faintly of butter and anxiety. But it's wearable, it no longer carries a visible halo of grime. In Viking terms, this counts as a domestic victory. Quirky inclusion? In several sagas, moments of bathing or garment changing are treated as socially significant. Before important meetings, weddings, or feasts, characters are described as putting on clean shirts, or combing their hair with care. One Icelandic tale even includes a duel being postponed because one fighter insisted on bathing first. Cleanliness wasn't just for comfort, it was tied to dignity, readiness, and status. You look around the yard now and realize how much of the day's rhythm has been devoted not just to removing dirt, but to performing care, for oneself, for the garments, for the expectations of the household. Even the neighbor with the shirt that still looks like it lost a fight with a stew pot has taken time to brush its surface. lay it out smooth, and pin it with a dried juniper sprig. That's not about necessity. That's about pride. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on grooming extended to all Vikings or was reserved for wealthier classes. Evidence suggests a mix. Even farmers had combs, even chieftains sometimes wore clothes with mended patches. Cleanliness, like everything in Viking life, was situational. If you were raiding across the North Sea, you didn't change your smock every day. But when you came home, you bathed. You washed. You showed your face and your shirt in public. The difference between a traveler and a vagrant could be as subtle as whether your sleeves were crusted or combed. You inspect your pile. Most of it's drying well. Some of it's already stiff again, thanks to a gust of wind that won't quit. A couple items are stubbornly damp and refusing to evolve. But overall, you've managed to take what was once a collection of questionable textiles and turn them into something socially viable. And that, in a Viking village, is no small thing. You rub your neck, stretch your fingers, feel every muscle in your body protest in slow, soggy unison. And then, from the far end of the drying yard, you hear someone mutter, "Is that your cloak?" You turn. It's your neighbor. She's eyeing your second-best woolen wrap with a raised brow. The edge is curled. The corner still has a faint streak of dye. You nod. She nods back, approvingly, it seems. A rare endorsement. And there it is. You didn't need perfection. Just recognition. That you tried. That you worked. That your laundry no longer poses a public threat. You smile, quietly. Because being clean in the Viking world didn't mean being spotless. It meant being presentable, in a world where mud, smoke, and sweat were guaranteed. It meant that when the longhouse door opened and the feast began, you could walk in without causing a breeze of discomfort. It meant, simply, that you cared. And so did they. By the time you get to the warrior's gear, your fingers are numb and your sense of smell has been permanently redefined, but you push forward anyway. Because no Viking laundry day would be complete without tackling the garments of someone who thinks daily wear means mud, blood, and the inside of a helmet. You drag the bundle of armor-padded tunics, woolen trousers, and stained cloak to the nearest flat rock and stare at it like it might lunge. This isn't clothing. This is a crime scene. One mainstream historical fact? Viking warriors didn't have uniforms, but their battle-wear was distinct from everyday clothing. A fighting man might wear a thick woolen tunic reinforced at the shoulders, with trousers stitched for movement, and in some cases, quilted layers beneath chainmail. While metal components were cleaned with oil and sand, the underlying textiles absorbed everything: sweat, dirt, animal fat, and bodily fluids from both the wearer and the unfortunate soul he just bested. After a battle or long voyage, these garments didn't just need washing, they needed intervention. You pick up the first tunic. It's stiff from dried salt and something darker, possibly blood, possibly stew. You don't ask. You just plunge it into the boiling vat with as much ceremony as one might give to throwing a cursed item into a volcano. The steam rises immediately, oily and sour, clinging to your face like a second skin. You stir with a long paddle. The water takes on a color you'd politely call marrow brown. Quirky inclusion? Some Norse texts and artifacts suggest that particularly valuable warrior garments, cloaks gifted by chieftains, trousers worn during famed raids, were passed down like heirlooms. These items were not washed unless absolutely necessary, for fear of washing away the luck, spirit, or blood-earned honor of their owners. A few surviving pieces have stitch marks indicating repairs made without removal of the stains, a kind of fabric fossilization of battle glory. You scoop the tunic out, dripping and steaming, and dump it onto the stone. The weight nearly pulls your shoulder from its socket. You begin scrubbing, not gently. The fabric moans. You work over the shoulder seams, where grease has turned to paste. You scrape old mud from the hem, and as you do, a tiny rock falls out, perhaps from some distant field, or a foreign shore. You pause a moment, then keep going. Historians still debate whether warriors themselves handled this post-battle maintenance or whether it was delegated to household members. Some argue that a soldier took pride in restoring his own gear, much as a swordsman sharpened his own blade. Others believe it was often the task of wives, daughters, or communal laundresses, people who had no say in the bloodshed but were left to deal with its laundry aftermath. You begin the rinse cycle. This time, you're not even bothering with herbs or lye. Just cold water and grit. You wring out the tunic, twice, then 3 times. The fabric begins to move more freely. The seams soften. The dark stains fade to a quiet shadow. It will never be clean, but it will be wearable. And in the Viking world, that's enough. Next, the cloak. Heavy wool, rain-soaked, torn at the hem, and stinking of fire pit and fatigue. You boil, you scrub, you whisper apologies to your wrists. Eventually, you lay it across 2 branches and weigh it with stones. It sags like a wounded beast. But it's clean. You glance to your side. Someone else is doing the same. A middle-aged woman rinsing what looks like a hunting jerkin, the leather collar stained with years of sweat. She glances at your pile, nods. There is a mutual understanding here, of what it means to clean something meant for violence. Not to erase what happened in it, just to make it ready again. For life, for wear, for memory. You begin folding what you've washed. The tunic is less sharp now. The cloak curls slightly at the corners, damp but lighter. The trousers, while still ghostly in odor, now sag more gently on the line. This gear has lived through things. But it will live again. You sit, let your hands rest in your lap. The scent of ash soap, sweat, and steel hangs in the air. You can still hear the soft hiss of water cooling in the cauldron, the rustle of wool on the breeze, the slow drip from sleeves. This is the part few people see. The aftermath, the cleansing, the strange peace that comes from handling garments that once faced chaos and now only face the wind. You look at the line of warriors' gear flapping softly in the evening air. It no longer speaks of blood. It only speaks of return. By now the sun is low enough that the steam from the rinse tubs begins to look like ghosts rising from the earth. Wisps curling through the air, carrying hints of wool, ash, riverbank, and the day's-long sweat. You kneel beside a small wooden bowl filled with something green and vaguely frothy. It doesn't look like much, but this is soapwort, a plant you've gathered and pounded yourself, and it just might be the gentlest miracle Viking laundry ever knew. After hours of lye burns and wool that refused to behave, this soft, bubbling leaf mash feels like mercy in a bowl. One mainstream historical fact: Vikings sometimes used soapwort, Saponaria officinalis, a flowering herb with naturally occurring saponins, compounds that, when crushed and agitated with water, produce a mild cleansing foam. It wasn't strong enough to cut through the oily crust of wool soaked in months of wear, but it worked beautifully on more delicate garments, especially linen and baby clothes. In an age before mass-produced soap, this plant-based alternative offered a rare, non-corrosive path to clean. You dip your fingers into the suds. It's cool, silky. The lather builds slowly, with a texture more like plant milk than soap. You pick up a linen headscarf, stained at the edges, but nothing dramatic, and begin to massage the foam into the cloth. The fabric responds immediately, relaxing under your fingertips like it's been waiting all day for this gentleness. You rinse it once, and the water comes away tinted with time and wear, not violence. Quirky inclusion? There are some mentions in medieval herbals that soapwort was used not only for laundry but also for ritual washing, cleansing a newborn, preparing garments for the dead, or even washing ceremonial items. It was tied to purity in both a practical and symbolic sense. One Icelandic tradition advised using soapwort-infused water to wash cloth before sewing it into a bride's veil, ensuring luck and softness in equal measure. You wash another scarf, a sleeve, a tunic made of loosely woven linen. These aren't the dramatic items, not the wool cloaks or bloodied battle shirts. These are the in-between pieces, the inner garments, the ones worn in private or layered beneath others. The ones people didn't boast about but depended on completely. And now, under your fingers, they are cared for in silence. Historians still debate how widespread soapwort use was in the Viking world. Some argue it was a local solution, practiced more in herb-rich regions or passed down among women as household knowledge. Others believe it was a seasonal choice, used in summer, when the plant grew wild and fresh, and replaced by ash or lye in the colder months. Either way, its gentle power was known, respected, and remembered. You pour the rinse water into the stream. It drifts downstream with a swirl of bubbles, catching the last light of the day. You gather the cleaned items and hang them on a smaller, lower line. The linen flutters faintly, softer now, a little brighter. They won't smell of smoke or soap. They'll smell like air, maybe a little grass, maybe memory. The change is quiet, but you feel it. Your hands ache less. Your shoulders are tired but loose. Even the wind has shifted, turning mild and fragrant, like it's forgiven you. Someone else has joined you now, an older woman, carrying a bucket with a bundle of baby smocks and wool booties. She doesn't speak, just nods, kneels, begins to work the foam gently through the cloth. Her fingers move with the rhythm of experience, slower than yours, more deliberate. Between you, the little bowl of soapwort feels like a pact. A quiet moment where laundry is not just maintenance, but care. You sit back and watch her hands for a while. You think about the people who wore these garments. About the ones who'll wear them again. About the idea that something so basic, plants and water and cloth, can be enough to bridge those lives. And here you are, in the thick of it, elbows deep in soapwort, tired beyond reason, still going, not because the laundry demands it, but because someone will put this shirt on tomorrow and deserve for it to feel soft. You can hear it before you see it, the uneasy quiet of the riverbank broken only by the brittle crack of ice splitting underfoot. You've been dreading this moment all day, because here's the truth of it. The clothes aren't clean, you're out of dry tunics, and now the river has frozen. There is no boiling water left in the vat. The soapwort bowl sits empty and cold. And what's still unwashed in your basket isn't just socks and scarves. It's the last wearable shirt for someone who needs it by morning. This is the nightmare of Viking winter laundry. When the ice comes early, the firewood runs low, and you run out of options. One mainstream historical fact: in the coldest parts of Scandinavia, laundry didn't stop for winter. It just got slower, harder, and more painful. Rivers froze. Tubs had to be thawed over coals or hot stones. Firewood was scarce and prioritized for cooking or heating homes. So laundry was done in short, brutal bursts, often indoors or in covered lean-tos, using melted snow, stored water, or semi-frozen buckets. Clothing froze mid-wash. Rinse water turned to slush. Clean garments hardened like armor before they could dry. You crouch near the stream now, prodding the ice with a stick, hoping to find a break. There's a crack, small, but wide enough to dip a cloth. You chip at the edge with the back of your scrubber, flinching every time the wood splinters. Finally, the surface gives way, and a small patch of water glints dark beneath the white. It steams faintly in the cold. You plunge a tunic in. The water shocks your hands instantly, drawing a hiss from your lips. You scrub quickly, fast, frantic motions, because you can't afford to go numb. Not yet. Quirky inclusion? There's a folktale from eastern Norway about a woman who lost her hand to frostbite while rinsing clothes in a mountain stream. The story ends with her ghost returning each winter to wash the garments of the dead, whispering their names through frozen mist. Whether true or not, the moral was clear. Laundry in winter was no joke. Frostbite, chilblains, and cracked skin were everyday risks. Even minor mistakes, like getting your mitten wet, could mean days of pain. You wring out the tunic. It stiffens as you do. Before you've even hung it, ice crystals begin to form along the hem. You shake it gently, hoping motion will keep it pliable, but it already feels like it's turning into some kind of ceremonial banner, cold, brittle, and wildly uncooperative. You pin it high, close to the fire pit. There's a chance it'll thaw and dry before the next snow. A chance. Historians still argue whether Viking communities had indoor laundry setups for the cold months. Some believe communal kitchens doubled as emergency drying rooms, garments hung high above the hearth, turned regularly, cautiously kept away from sparks. Others suggest snow itself was used as a cleaning agent in desperation. Clothing buried in fresh powder, beaten, then aired out. The friction, some say, helped dislodge dirt. Whether it worked or simply made things colder is anyone's guess. You pull out the next item, wool hose, gray and heavy. You sigh, dip, scrub, wince. Your fingers are beyond cold now. They move more slowly. Your knuckles ache with each movement. But you keep going, because this is the last pair. Because there is no backup. A neighbor brings you a cup of warm broth. You drink it without speaking, the steam curling into your face, thawing your eyelashes. You nod your thanks. She doesn't ask questions. She knows. Everyone here knows. You rinse again. You wring. You hang. Each item joins the line like a frostbitten prayer. Laundry in winter is different. There's no rhythm, no chatter, no scent of herbs or smoke. There's just the breath, the silence, the brittle wind. You're not just washing, you're fighting cold itself. Every sleeve you lift is an act of defiance. Every pair of socks you keep from freezing solid is a miniature victory. And when it's over, when the fire's burned low and the last tunic is stiffening into sleep, you step back, numb and red-fingered, and let the sky turn dark above your quiet, icy battleground. There's no stream this time, no fire pit, no drying line strung between two fence posts, sagging gently with the weight of clean wool. Instead, you're hunched beside a barrel on the deck of a longship, trying to rinse a linen tunic in salt water that smells like old fish and sea gods with digestive problems. Welcome to the final level of Viking laundry purgatory. Washing on the move. Because sometimes you're not in a cozy settlement with lye and boiling cauldrons. You're halfway across the sea, surrounded by shouting men, damp wood, and absolutely no spare shirts. One mainstream historical fact: Vikings were seafarers, traders, raiders, explorers. Many spent weeks or even months away from home, sleeping under sails, wrapped in cloaks that doubled as bedding. Clean laundry wasn't impossible during these journeys, but it was rare, difficult, and deeply strategic. Clothes might be rinsed during port stops, aired over ship railings in the sun, or washed with seawater in desperate moments. Salt preserved fish and meats, but it did nothing good for wool. On the contrary, it could stiffen fibers, corrode seams, and leave your shirt smelling like a kelp sandwich. You plunge the tunic again. The water in the barrel sloshes with each rocking wave. You try to agitate the cloth, but there's hardly enough room to move. Your knuckles knock against wood. The shoulder seam tears a little. You sigh. This isn't real washing. It's symbolic at best. But the tunic was starting to ferment, and you figured even a barrel scrub was better than enduring another day of being downwind from your own armpits. Quirky inclusion? Some Norse seafarers tied garments to ropes and let them drag behind the ship for miles, letting the salt and friction do what soap couldn't. It worked, sort of. You had to haul them back in before they tore loose or tangled in kelp. There's even one story, probably apocryphal, about a warrior who lost his only decent cloak this way, and spent the rest of the voyage blaming sea spirits and wearing a fishing net instead. Historians still debate whether laundry was planned for during long expeditions. Some think extra garments were packed, to be rotated and re-worn. Others believe sailors operated on a brutal two-garment system, one to wear, one to dry. When both were soaked or foul, bathing in cold salt water was the only relief. The few surviving travel chests from ship burials suggest at least some consideration was given to fabric maintenance. Small combs, patches of soapstone, and even herbal bundles have been found tucked between cloaks. You wring out the tunic now, the salt-heavy water dripping onto your feet. It's not cleaner, just less alarming. You hang it on a rope slung above the rowing bench. The wind tugs at it instantly, threatening to hurl it into the sea. You weigh it down with a fishhook. Practical? No. Effective? Not really, but at least it won't escape. A crewmate beside you watches silently, then sighs and pulls out a rag of his own. It might have been a shirt once, He dunks it into your barrel, murmurs something that sounds like an apology to Odin, and begins scrubbing. The two of you work without talking. There's nothing to say. The sea is wide, the deck is wet, and no one smells good. But you're trying. You drag a second shirt from your satchel. It's been rolled tightly, wrapped in a scrap of oiled leather, kept for emergencies. You unroll it slowly. The scent is still faintly herbal, juniper, maybe, or the dream of juniper. You hold it for a moment, then rewrap it. Too soon, too precious. You'll save that for the feast hall in Miklagard, or the market in Dublin, or wherever this voyage ends. For now, seawater and patience. You sit back, watching the tunic flap above you. The salt will dry into it. It'll scratch tomorrow, but it'll be wearable. Good enough. You close your eyes. Let the ship sway beneath you. The wind tugs your hood. Somewhere behind you, someone begins to sing a low, meandering verse about wind and wool and how love fades faster than linen. You smile faintly. You don't remember the rest of the song, but the sentiment feels right. Laundry on the sea is a prayer cast into the waves. And sometimes, it floats back. It's late now, not just in the day, but in the season. The sun rides lower with every passing week, tracing lazier arcs across the sky. The cold no longer sharpens you. It settles into your joints, kneads itself into your shoulders, lives quietly in your spine. And with the darkening days comes a subtle shift in the rhythm of things. The laundry pile still grows, but less often with sweat-drenched tunics and more with cloaks, fur-lined mittens, and thick woolen undershirts worn 2, sometimes 3 days in a row. Welcome to pre-winter washing, when you begin to choose what to clean, and what can wait until spring. One mainstream historical fact: as winter approached in Viking Age Scandinavia, laundry routines shifted dramatically. Shorter days, freezing water, and dwindling resources meant that washing had to be strategic. Households cleaned only what was most essential: base layers worn close to the body, garments that could be rotated, and anything that had begun to threaten the health or nose of the wearer. The rest, especially heavy cloaks or furs, were often aired rather than washed, hung near smoke or cold wind to be cleansed, in the most generous sense of the word. You hold up a woolen mantle that's clearly been through at least 2 rainstorms, a bout of firewood hauling, and one unfortunate incident with a goat. It smells of smoke, wet grass, and something unplaceably sour. You wrinkle your nose, then you hang it on the fence, pull your cloak tighter, and decide that today, this counts as done. Because in this season, clean enough is enough. Quirky inclusion? Some Viking households practiced a peculiar tradition during this time of year: smoke bathing their outer garments. Cloaks and shawls were suspended above the hearth, where the rising smoke would dry and scent them. This was believed to preserve the fibers, discourage lice, and imbue the clothing with a scent associated with the home. In one Icelandic household inventory, a smoke beam is listed alongside soapstone pots and drying racks. It was, quite literally, a garment deodorizing system via wood smoke. You return to your small pile of underlayers. These are the garments that must be washed: the shirts worn close to the skin, the linen shifts, the woolen trousers that no longer respond to hope alone. You choose one shirt, wring it a final time, and lay it over the hearthstones to dry in the residual warmth. The fabric curls slightly at the edges, but the dampness fades. You nudge it closer to the fire. Not too close. You've already seen what happens to a sleeve that touches flame. It turns to lacework, but not the pretty kind. Historians still argue whether winter laundry was truly deferred or just adapted. Some evidence suggests rotating garments instead of washing them, letting one set rest while another was worn. Others believe that for the poorest, washing was an unaffordable luxury. Wood and water were for staying alive, not for wringing out socks. But even among the wealthier households, the end of the year marked a subtle retreat from deep laundry work. Clothes were winter clean, which often meant not actively molding. You move to your final garment of the day: a child's tunic, barely big enough for your forearm. It's patched at the elbow, frayed at the collar, but soft from wear. You rinse it slowly, letting the cool water run through your fingers as you knead the cloth. The child who wears this never notices its smell, only the comfort, only that it's warm and that it's always there. You wring it out carefully, smoothing the shape with your palm before laying it near the fire's edge. One day, they'll learn how to wash their own. For now, you do it for them. Outside, the wind picks up again, scattering ash across the stones. A few drying garments flutter half-heartedly in the dusk. The world has turned quieter. You can feel the long dark creeping closer with every breath. But inside, beside the hearth, your hands move slowly. Washing, folding, preparing what will be worn again. What must endure. Because in this season, laundry isn't about freshness. It's about readiness. And a shirt that dries by firelight carries more comfort than the finest perfume. The wash bucket is empty now. Not by accident, not from neglect, but because you've reached that strange, rare state where everything that needed washing has been washed. For the first time all day, your hands aren't inside a tunic, or a sleeve, or coaxing the stiffness out of wool. They're just hands again, calloused, raw, wrinkled like soaked bark, but yours. And suddenly you realize something. The stillness is louder than the labor ever was. Viking laundry doesn't end with a cheer. It ends with a long, low exhale, and the creak of a wooden bench under weight that's finally been put down. One mainstream historical fact? For all the noise and effort, Viking laundry was part of a larger cycle of domestic order that governed every season. Clothing was one of the few possessions worn daily, repaired often, and almost never discarded. A single tunic could live for years, washed dozens of times, patched endlessly, shared across generations. Keeping those garments usable wasn't just cleanliness. It was economy, culture, memory, even. Laundry was the silent keeper of continuity. You stand slowly, spine unfolding like a drying line in reverse. Every muscle has its own protest. But the weight is different now. You move without reaching for soap, or a paddle, or a soaked hem. You just move. It's disorienting, liberating. You scan the lines one more time. Every garment hanging is a story retold. This sleeve fixed with blue thread after a mishap with a fire poker. That apron with the faint iron stain from the forge. The shirt you wore when the goat got loose in the mead cellar. They are clean now, but they carry history like whispers in the seams. Quirky inclusion? In some Viking households, garments were folded and stored with tokens sewn into the corners, small runes stitched with colored thread, meant to protect the wearer or recall a specific event. These weren't always visible from the outside, but they lived close to the skin, intimate and enduring. Some tunics had over a dozen such additions by the time they were passed down or buried, tiny embroidered footnotes to lives otherwise lost to time. You begin to fold, not the rushed, utilitarian folds of early morning, when washing felt like survival. These are slower, gentler movements. A tuck at the hem, a palm smoothing over a shoulder seam. You stack them not by size or type, but by how soon they'll be needed again. The child's tunic still smells faintly of sweetgrass. It goes on top. Historians still argue whether Norse families had designated linen chests or folded items into cloth bundles hung from beams. Likely both. Some garments were stored near the hearth for quick access, others were wrapped in leather, sealed with waxed twine, or layered with dried herbs to prevent dampness. What mattered most wasn't the method, it was the care. The preservation of function in a world where every cloth had to last. The fire pops softly. Outside, the last shirt on the line lifts gently, the breeze catching it like a sail. You leave it be. It'll finish drying in the dark, just as it always has. You sit again, this time not because you must, but because you can. The space around you is quieter now. Only the sounds of wood cooling, water dripping, and distant footsteps remain. The air smells like soap ash, like pine smoke, like worn wool aired out in sunlight. Not clean, not perfumed, but lived in. And that's enough. Laundry is never really finished, of course. Tomorrow will bring another pair of muddy socks, another cloak gone stiff with salt. But tonight, it's done. And in that rare, brief window between the washing and the wearing, you remember what all this was for. It wasn't just to chase stains or prove diligence. It was to reset, to wrap yourself, and your people, in something you touched, softened, and folded by hand. A kind of cloth-bound promise. That we endure, that we care, that we begin again. You wake the next morning to the soft, rhythmic tap of rain on thatch and the cool hush that follows the first true frost. The kind that sticks, not a passing shimmer, but a thick, silver glaze clinging to every rooftop, branch, and yes, even to the drying lines strung quietly across the yard. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders and step outside. The breath fogs from your mouth in slow bursts. The world feels padded, muted, like it's been carefully wrapped in damp wool. And there, suspended like stiff pennants in the gray light, hang the last of your laundry, frozen clean. One mainstream historical fact? In the colder months of the Viking year, freshly washed garments often froze stiff before they dried. This wasn't a failure, it was part of the process. In the absence of heat, cold air drying served as a kind of pause button, halting mildew growth and odor until warmth returned. Some households even favored a controlled freeze over smoke or fire drying, especially for linen, which warped under direct heat. A shirt frozen mid-sway, if aired properly, would eventually soften again, provided the sun returned. You approach the line now and touch a sleeve. It crackles under your fingers. Solid, but not fragile. Just resting. The garment remembers yesterday's wind, yesterday's soap, and the heat of your hand. You lift it gently, not to fold, not yet, but to admire. The fibers hold their shape like a sculpture. The curve of a shoulder seam. The curve of a collar bent slightly, as if it nodded once and froze that way. You smile. There's a strange kind of beauty here. Quirky inclusion? Some Viking families created what could only be described as ice galleries, on purpose, arranging their freshly washed clothes along walls or across low fences where frost would crystallize them overnight. Children were said to run between the stiff garments pretending they were warriors in enchanted armor. One 12th century account from a Christian scribe visiting northern Norway described the yard of a wealthy farmer as lined with glinting tunics stiff as statues. Whether poetic license or actual observation, the image holds, cleanliness preserved in cold. You begin the slow process of retrieving your garments from the line. Some release with a light tug. Others require a firm but patient grip, peeling them like bark from the string. You stack them inside the doorway, where they'll thaw slowly by the hearth. And as they do, they'll begin to move again, sleeves falling, hems softening, fabric bending back into the shapes of bodies. Your hands, though raw and reddened, feel the weight shift as you gather them, less brittle now, more familiar. Ready to wear. Historians still argue whether this method of freeze cleaning was deliberate or simply tolerated. Some suggest snow served as an occasional scrubbing medium, especially when water froze or ran low. Garments might be buried in clean drifts, then shaken vigorously and aired out. Others dismiss the idea as apocryphal or exaggerated, but even the skeptics agree. In a world without dryers, cold was part of the toolkit. You bring the thawing pile inside. The house smells like wood smoke and faint soap. A child's tunic already lies near the hearth, half draped on a bench, warming fast. You drape more items over chairs, on racks, along ropes strung overhead. It's a quiet scene, no pounding, no scrubbing. Just the last chapter, the gentlest part, laundry that has survived the hardest part of its journey. And in this silence, something else settles in, relief. The garments will be ready for winter now. The washing done, the dirt behind you, the cold outside. All that remains is to wear them well, to keep warm, to keep dry, to keep going. You run your fingers along the shoulder of a half-thawed cloak. It no longer smells like sweat. It smells like survival. You've folded the last tunic. The lines are bare now, save for a single forgotten sock waving limply in the wind like the world's smallest flag of surrender. Inside the longhouse, the air hangs heavy with the scent of wood smoke, thawed wool, and faint herbs crushed underfoot. The garments you've scrubbed, beaten, rinsed, frozen, smoked, and prayed over now lie stacked in neat, slightly lopsided bundles along the hearthwall. Each one warm, each one dry, each one a small, stubborn victory. And now comes the quietest, most sacred part of Viking laundry: putting it all away. One mainstream historical fact: in Viking homes, clean clothes weren't just shoved into piles. They were folded, bundled, wrapped, and often stored in wooden chests, woven baskets, or hung from ceiling beams. Some garments were layered with dried moss or sweet-smelling plants like angelica or thyme to discourage mold and insects. In wealthier households, particularly among chieftains or traders, garments were even arranged by occasion: daily wear, ceremonial use, traveling cloaks, and death clothes, kept pristine in case of burial. In simpler homes, they were merely placed where the smoke wouldn't curl up and stain them again. You crouch near the hearth and begin packing garments into a low cedarwood chest. Each item still holds a trace of the outdoors: the breath of the stream, the curl of fog, the snap of wind. You stack a shift between a pair of hose and a patched tunic. Slide in a woolen underskirt. Nestle a scarf along the rim. Nothing fancy, but everything is in its place. Quirky inclusion? In some Viking families, the act of putting laundry away included a short blessing or murmured phrase, part housekeeping, part superstition. Phrases like "stay warm," "stay strong," or "serve again with ease" were whispered into folded cloaks or stitched into tunic hems. It wasn't magic, exactly, just a habit, a hope, a way of thanking fabric for enduring. You whisper one now, not out loud, not for show, just a soft thought passed from hand to cloth. Historians still debate how many garments the average Norse person owned. Some argue most people had 2 or 3 of everything: one to wear, one to wash, one to mend. Others suggest that, depending on region and wealth, people might have only a single functional tunic and rotated accessories, shawls, hoods, belts, to disguise repetition. Either way, each item mattered. Each one was worth keeping. You stand, close the chest, tie the latch with a strip of cloth dyed faintly red. A good color, bold, even when faded. You look around the longhouse now. The fire burns low. The children sleep under bundled cloaks. The hearthstones glint. The air is still, and in that stillness, a realization settles on you like snow. The laundry is not just done. It is ready. These garments will clothe meals and chores, sled rides and midwinter stories. They'll wrap around sleep, shake off frost, bear the weight of newborns, carry the smell of sea salt and pine sap and shared laughter. They will warm backs bent over looms and shoulders bowed in prayer. They will absorb life, and you've prepared them to do just that. Not because it's easy, but because it matters. And now, everything slows. The fire's crackle softens. The wind outside retreats into the corners of the roof beams. The last wisps of steam rise from the garments still near the hearth, curling into the air like gentle thoughts let go. You settle onto your woven mat, cloak wrapped tight, hands tucked under your chin, and feel the warmth of wool that was once soaked and heavy, now dry and light against your skin. The room darkens around the edges. The clothes, now folded and packed, seem to hum with quiet purpose. Not loud, not proud, just ready. They don't boast of their cleanliness. They whisper of use, of resilience, of care folded carefully into every seam. You can still smell the ghost of herbs, faint thyme, a touch of smoke. You breathe in. The air is thick with quiet. Every sleeve and sock and hood in this room has passed through your fingers today. Scrubbed, lifted, laid to rest. You didn't just wash them. You returned them to their place in the story. And now, it's your turn to rest. The flames dim, casting long shadows over drying racks and laundry lines now empty and still. You feel the weight of the day roll back, like a tide receding from shore. The hum of the hearth, the hush of the wool, the rhythm of wind against wood, it all slows. Softens, fades. You close your eyes, wrapped in cloth you know by touch alone. Sleep comes quietly, like laundry on the line at dusk. folded, finished, at peace.